On my chair project, I decided to house my mortises. Why house them? Well, because this kind of a joint is a lot stronger than this kind of a joint that won't hold anything. So I think it adds a little bit to the strength of the chair. And I think it's important to have as much strength as possible built into your chairs because they undergo a lot of stress. My chair project is a little bit different than some of the house mortising projects that you might encounter because I have angles on my legs. Everything is at different directions. The tenons come into the leg at an angle parallel with the side, but at an angle with the face that they're going to be going into. That posed a little bit of a problem trying to do it by hand. I know there are ways that you can do it. It's much easier if you have a square piece that you first put the mortises into and line everything up, then cut away the excess material. In the interest of saving some of my mahogany wood, I cut the leg angles first. Now I have to figure out a way to solve the problem of getting in exactly in place so that the housing lines up correctly on an angled surface. In addition to that, my housing is 1/4 of an inch in from the outside edge. This is a common thing where you might have it a specific distance all the time from your outer edge where you want the joining piece to come in. A little bit of a reveal. On the Pantorouter, I have my template guide in place. This is just a square that's cut out to a dimension to do the outside edge of my house mortise. There's a spreadsheet that you can get that helps you work out the dimension of your template to get the correct inside diameter for the mortises. I'm using a 10mm bearing guide, and I have a 1/4 of an inch bit in my router because I want that kind of a radius on the outside edge of my chair rails. To get the 1/4 of an inch offset, I have a piece of 1/4 inch MDF. It's going to be very consistent. I'll use this here and when I go to put in my dominoes. And I've lower the bearing guide against the template, and I'll bring this up so that the bit is just barely touching but doesn't really move this 1/4 inch piece of MDF. That'll establish the distance that I want. I don't see any daylight between the bit and the MDF. I've marked the center of my Pantorouter with the centering jig to match it up with the template center. And I've marked the center of each of my mortises that I want to put into my leg. I'll match that center line up with the center line on my table and clamp it into place and do the mortise. Put the dust collection on. As I bring this up, I want to make sure that when the bit touches the surface that I have 3/16 of an inch will give me, with the 10-degree angle that I have here and a 1/4 inch up, gives me the 1/8 inch depth to the shallowest side of the mortise. Now I can clean up this mortise a bit and ensure that my tenon, which is actually just the edge of my piece, fits into that mortise correctly before I go on to the next step. It's just a little bit too long. Rather than take it off the top, I'm going to take it off the bottom so that everything references the same way. And I'll just take a little bit off with my plane. Clean up that mortise a bit. This is just right. I still need to round these corners a little bit better. I've got a 1/8 inch round over plane that I'll use for that, or you could just sand it down. And I'm really only concerned with the part that's going into the mortise at this time. The rest will get sanded over when I do my finishing work. That's a good fit. I have marked on this end where I'm going to be putting my mortises. I need one mortise that's long, one that's short for the tenons, because otherwise where the legs intersect I would have an issue, and I'll show you that on the domino. Remember this little piece of 1/4 inch MDF? I'll be using that now in the domino to set the height. I want to make sure that if I had plunged normally with the edge right where it's set, I'd plunge a hole at mortise at 10 millimeters down, and I want it at 10 plus this 1/4 inch spacer. Because the settings on the domino are in 5 millimeter increments, I want to be really exact. A template like this or a piece of material, using that for my offset is much more accurate than a measurement and looking at the scale. The other thing is going from the 10 setting to the next setting up to the 15 and trying to go by this little scale that's here on the side of the domino is a little bit difficult for me to read exactly where that 16 comes with this marker. So this is a better spacer. It's exactly where I need it. If I'm off even just the tiniest fraction of an inch or a millimeter, it's going to make it so my mortises don't fit correctly. So I'll loosen this up, and the only place I can really set it down is someplace that this plate contacts with the rest of the machine. Right here is where I'll be setting this spacer, and making sure the spacer's not on anything, that I'm not pressing overly hard. And I'll double check that on the other side. Seems to be right. And I've got my markings with the 35 and 25 to ensure that I'm doing the plunging correct, down from the 1/4 of an inch offset. Normally I clamp on either side of where I'm wanting to plunge. You're not going to be able to see what I'm doing with the lining up, so I'll just explain that first. It's really important when I set this down on the work surface that I'm not tilted back this direction too much or even forward. There's nothing here for the fence to register against, so I want to make sure that I'm completely flat right here. No gaps visible that way or that way. I'll still be using the narrow setting on top of the domino for the width. I can always come back and make it wide if I have to make it a little bit looser. And I've got my depth set. I'm going to be using 25 first. I'll change the setting to 35 for the other one. That's the first. And this one's deeper, this one's shallower. And I'll flip it over to do the other parts, doing the 35. Now you'll see why I needed to do two separate depths, in that I've gone all the way through on the 35 on both of them. You can see where it's gone through. So if I went all the way through on either one, the two tenons would interfere with one another, and that's why I need to have the different offsets. So I've shaved off the sides of two of these dominoes so that they fit in a little bit better just for my testing. That's on the one that's 35 deep. That's 25. So you can see that I have a bit of a difference there. It should be 1 centimeter. And the way that this one goes in, looks like I may not have them in quite far enough. Nice snug fit. Really good solid joinery.